All right, hello folks. Welcome to a rare weekend stream. It's morning-ish my time on Saturday, and I'm trying to do some more streaming now that basically I have more time and energy to do so. So welcome. Today I don't have anything specific to get done other than playing around with some refactoring, some other minor things. I have a few repositories that I call a playground, where I basically just dump stuff into it, stuff that I see from Reddit occasionally, or other things that I'm working on, or if somebody asks a question, I need sort of a simple project to play around with. So I've got some stuff in there that I'm going to be doing. So one of the things, let me switch to our code. And you may not be able to see it because of the way this hat is, but it's my refactor hat. So I've got my refactor hat on. This code here was posted on Reddit, and I thought it was interesting because it's sort of what I see from those who are sort of new to programming is lots of redundancy, lots of repeated kind of code. And I just thought it was just fascinating because somebody had asked about sort of, hey, why doesn't this work and so on. Let me actually just update my, there we go. So I thought this was really interesting because like they created classes, but didn't quite understand what the purpose of those classes are. So for example, they create this world. It's like, okay, great. So there's this world, there's a player, there's a dragon, there's an orc, right? So it's basically sort of a roguelike kind of thing with, text-based and that kind of thing. But then they call world print map and then pass in like details from those objects. And you may think like, oh, that's silly. Just pass in the objects. Yeah, high quality code transfers. But this is it to me. I am always fascinated. Like I am always so curious. Like, what is your thought process? What sort of mental structures are you missing? And for me, as just someone who wants to help people, it's like, what can I do to help you understand what you actually need to do? And code like this is really great for refactoring because I can take this and just refactor. Like there's no tests for this, which is why there's some bugs in it. And basically just refactor my way and clean it up using straightforward refactorings. And this kind of stuff applies to any code base. Maybe the code bases that most of us work with are not this bad. But, we see similar, maybe again, sort of not this bad of passing in, these kinds of specifics, especially passing in to the world its own information like that. Okay. That hopefully you don't see. I mean, this is hopefully not something you see in any kind of real code base, although I should never be surprised. So translators, you ask about like, do they care about making good quality code? For people who are learning, I don't get too concerned about whether they care about quality, right? Because at that level, they're just trying to get stuff to work. And I think that focusing almost too early on quality can make it really frustrating for people to learn. And so I want people to focus on, look, get it to work. Here are some techniques that you can think about. But then, yes, pretty quickly get to the point to recognize that this just is not good. There's no encapsulation here. The names are fine, right? At least their names, and there is an attempt at classes, but clearly, you know, there's missing knowledge about how to structure code like this. And so I've also been working on doing a bunch of stuff with characterization tests recently, because in my refactoring hexagonal architecture course, that's what we're sort of working on right now, is doing some characterization for the game before we basically start splitting out the IO from the non-IO, separation of concerns. Anyway, so there's this, which I'm going to do some practice on for refactoring, because one of the things I always tell my students, I tell people in my coaching situations, like, you know, you have to set aside time to practice, to learn how to use the tools that we have, and we have awesome tools like IntelliJ at our disposal. You have to practice, and you also have to experiment. And so there's practice, which is, let me do something, you know, what's sometimes called a kata. How do I refactor this? Let me try this way. Let me try this other way. Always trying to you know, same starting point, and then trying out different things, trying out different constraints. Can I do this only with automated refactorings? Can I change this code so there are no if statements at all? Things like that. But then there's the experiment of like, what happens when I do this? How can I do a refactoring to do this other thing? So that's what I'm going to be spending time on today. There's also some other miscellaneous stuff. Oh, I should turn off the timer for some of those are about. Let's see. Timers. Nightbot is happily promoting stuff that is not relevant right now. Let's disable. Okay. There we go. So this other thing I have, and it's kind of funny that Nightbot mentioned James Shore, because one of the things he has as a setup for his testing when he's doing TDD is he's got basically a process that's always running the tests, and it emits a sound when the test passes and when the test fails. And I was like, I'd like to do that, because I think it has some really interesting psychological aspects, but also like you can just and if you set up a background process where it's always running that, then you almost don't have to stop and explicitly run the tests. I mean, for me, it's a one keystroke to run the tests, maybe two or three. But then you have to sort of wait and think about it. Whereas if it's sort of running all the time, then you can just sort of stay in the flow a bit more. So, so at first I started playing around with some sound stuff using WAV files, and spent far too much time listening to probably 200 different sounds. But then I realized, like, oh, why am I doing that? And then I have to worry about where the WAV file is. So instead, I basically did some playing around with the MIDI support that Java has. Did you know Java has built-in MIDI support? It's had it for many years. And so you can play notes. So it has synthesizer stuff built in, but it turned out that actually the MIDI stuff is a bit easier to get it to play certain things. So so I've got my my synth version of this. So here you basically get a synthesizer, get the MIDI synthesizer. It has a bunch of different instruments, I don't know, it sounds like there's only about 80 different instruments, even though there's 127. And then you can basically just play notes. So this is using the straight up just direct synthesizer. And then using sort of immediate note on and note off. So this one basically does this. Those notes are way too fast. And let's see. So it's kind of what, the sound you're going for is like the negative sound is the first one, and then sort of the positive, so negative, sort of failure sound, and then the positive sound. It's just a little bit too quick, so I can change it. So let's change it, this to 200, and then this to 400. So the problem with this technique, hello, J. Walter. The problem with this technique is it's basically using sleep to define the length of the note, because it does a note on, and then it sleeps, and then it does a note off. And that's really not a great way to get sort of like consistent playback. And it's, to me, it's such a small thing. But it seems like such a small thing, but it really doesn't matter. Hey, Whiskey Sierra, nice to see you. So instead, I basically landed on the. So I can actually do, where is it, the sound player? Yeah. So this one uses the sound effects wave files. So it's actually kind of nicer. But again, it's sort of a little bit of a pain, because I have to make sure that these WAV files are available. So the idea is I want to have this packaged up in a small library, because one of the things you can do, and this is you can have sort of a plugin into JUnit where you can listen to things that happen. So what you can do is you can listen and be notified when the execution of an entire test suite happens. And so here, if I have this plugged in, so let me run this test. So I think this will pass. Right, so I ran the test, it passed, and we got the passing sound. And this test failed, and so it played the failure sound. So what's happening is we're basically plugged into the test results, the test execution listener, and basically just we find out if it passed or not. And then when the execution is finished, we can then find out, we can then say basically if it passed, then we play this sound. If it failed, then it played this sound. Tram says, really interested in how you make this ifs fixed, and not quite sure what you mean. So anyway, so this is like not a lot of code, but it plugs nicely in. And the way you configure this is you create a meta-inf resources, and I'm blanking on who had the article about this. I'll have to find it. So I'm going to write up how this is done. Oh, you mean in the world stuff? Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily going to get rid of all ifs. That's not, that's not going to be my practice. My practice is basically just gonna refactor. So this class, then you basically say, hey, I want this class to be used and loaded for JUnit when it starts up, and then JUnit will call it as appropriate, and then I'm basically just using my sound player, which right now uses these sounds. and I had a bunch of system out printlns because like something was taking a little bit of time to load up. I think there was something where it was not loading things up. The other thing is you also have to sleep at the end because otherwise the sound gets cut off because you have to give it, because it's running on a it's non-blocking, so you have to basically wait until the sound completes. There may be a better way. I spent probably far too much time trying to figure some of this out, and I figured this is good enough. Does it fail in a pipeline without an audio device? I have no idea. I haven't run it. I haven't run it on anything other than locally. There's I would not be surprised if one of these things threw an exception. So, I mean, so there might be it might be an unsupported audio file. That's fine. These are WAV files, so that shouldn't happen. Line of it unavailable. That could certainly happen if it's running on a VM or container or something that doesn't have that support, or perhaps. So probably throw this kind of exception if it weren't available, and then it just wouldn't do anything. So that's something I want to integrate this. So there's sort of like 3 different things I'm combining. One is playing sounds. 2 is having this notifier listen when the full test execution completes. And the 3rd is running Maven Daemon. So Maven Daemon is relatively new. It's basically, instead of having to start up a JVM, cold start, execute it, and then build and run the tests, Maven D sort of keeps stuff warm, and so can run a little bit faster. Although to be honest, like the startup time is really small, like at least on this machine. So which is all I care about. Anyway, so that's something I'm going to work on. Set aside some time to work on. So my main goal for today, which is the refactoring practice, is fix primitive obsession. So I've got great techniques for fixing primitive obsession that are just scalar values, right? Numeric or string or something like that, or for collections. But when it's a combination of the two, then it's a bit more tricky. Yeah, I think it's, I don't know how to package this kind of thing, because I don't want to make an IntelliJ plugin because that's just, it's really not fun to make IntelliJ plugins. It's just, I've done it, and every time I think like I want to do it, I look and I'm reminded of how awful it is. So it's probably not going to be a plugin. I'm really just waiting for IntelliJ to someday implement. There's an open issue where right now what you can do is with any run execution, you can say, where is it? Before launch. You can add a before launch task. What I want, and I'm not the only one, is I want an after completion task. Because what I want to do is I want to be notified by IntelliJ when it runs the tests, did they succeed or not? Because I actually want to do several things. If code changed and test passes, I want to do a commit. Otherwise, I want to be able to run, like if it passed and play a happy or sad sound. So there's all this stuff as a result of the running the unit tests that I would love to be able to do, but IntelliJ does not currently support it. It doesn't have that option. And there's an open issue. It's been open for some amount of time. Don't know if they'll ever do it. There are plugins that do some of this. There's an old one called Infinitest, but it hasn't been updated in years. I don't even know if it still works. Last time I tried it, I don't think it worked. So I'm not going to package it as a plugin. I don't know what else to package it as, because I guess I package it as a library, and then it becomes a dependency. because the meta-inf service is just in the jar, and as long as that jar is, I'm not sure. Probably it would be a tiny JUnit plugin. Yeah. Yeah, Astrid. And Francis first fine on Eclipse. Yeah, that's a price I'm not willing to pay. And I think part of that is because Eclipse works very differently in terms of how it compiles and runs things. Like you can run stuff even if not everything's compiling it. Yeah, that's going to happen. Sorry. All right, so I was talking about primitive obsession. You can have primitive obsession with exceptions, but that's a separate issue. So one of the weekly ensembles that I run, we've been working on this blackjack game, which comes originally from my course, and we've been working on it for 92 sessions. And last Friday, which I guess is yesterday, we ran into an interesting situation around primitive obsession. So one of the things that you do in blackjack is you place bets. And in the game, when you do place bets, so there's a method, place bets, that takes a list of integer. Yeah, Tramp Stars, you can go ahead and start campaigning for that. That's not going to happen. So place bets takes a list of integer. Now this is problematic because of two things. And so this is basically primitive obsession. First of all, one of the things that you have to do is you, in fact, I'm going to go to the other branch, this one. So magically, I'm now back at a point right before we started fixing this problem. One of the things that we have to do when we get a list of bets is first make sure that each individual bet is a valid amount. What is valid? Well, it can't be negative, it can't be 0, and it can't be more than 100. That means anywhere I'm operating on a bet, I have to do this validation. The other part is, if you look at this, you get no information, right? So this is, to me, one of the code smells that once you see it, you start seeing it all over the place, especially in a language that has static types like Java or C#. Integer tells you nothing about this. It can be anything, and so therefore you have to figure out, and like, what do they mean by integer here? You can tell by the name of the method it's probably something to do with bets, but you have no idea how would you get information about what kinds of things are going to be done with it. You would have to look through the code. So exactly. So so this should be a value object, right? And value objects is one of the most common ways to fix primitive obsessions. You create a value object. Sometimes an enum is fine if it's something that like, you know, suits or ranks of a card. But exactly what's here, it's missing. It's this idea of putting domain knowledge and abstractions, right, into the code. And the more we do that, the more it's clear what you're supposed to be doing, what its range and maximum values, but really, like, what's it about? Give me some kind of name, some kind of handle, so I can focus on other things. So one of the things we did earlier in this code base is there's a way to specify when you start the game how many players are basically at the table. And at some point, we'll probably rename game to be table, because that's really what it represents in the blackjack game. And so when you say, where is it? Number of players, that used to be just an int. But then we had to validate it. And in fact, we were invalidating it. So you could have 100 players, and that was probably not a great idea. Or you could have 0 players, and then it wouldn't work. Yes, absolutely, Tramstars. I tell people sorry, not sorry. Once you really start getting primitive obsession, you start seeing it everywhere and start wanting to fix it everywhere. So here what we did is we basically turned an int and any validation that we had on it into, in this case, a record. So the validation is built in, and there's some interesting stuff about this validation. So James Shore and I have talked about some of this kind of thing. And I've been thinking a lot about, do we want to blindly throw exceptions that the caller might not be aware of that are going to be thrown because we don't declare them, right? They're not checked exceptions. So runtime bug would show up that you might not be expecting. But I think in this case, it's fine. There are other cases where maybe we wouldn't do that. We'd probably want to have a validate thing, because eventually, like, and this is to me the fundamental thing. This gets into more about validation, which I don't want to go too deep on. But like, could it possibly be less than 1 or greater than 5? Well, somewhere we got information that came from outside of our code base, right? It was typed in on a UI, it came in through a message, was read in from a file. Somewhere we got data that was outside of our system, and we need to make sure that it's correct. And what this does is not only protect us from, now in this constructor, I don't have to check to make sure that player count is valid. I just accept it, and it's by definition valid because you wouldn't have been able to create it unless it was valid. The other thing is it makes it clear, right? Sure, the parameter name tells you what it is, but when you're on the call site, unless you have sort of the code inlay hints that show you the names of the parameters, and honestly, I can't stand that. That drives me crazy when I see it. I just, like, I don't need to see that. And yes, I can ask for what are these parameters, but it's a lot easier to just have IntelliJ say, hey, when you want to create a game, right, and you start typing, it's already going to suggest what the thing is. And then I can go and do that. So yeah, if you're in a language with named arguments, I still think it helps to have a type, because the name of the argument may or may not be intention revealing enough. It can only go so far, so it can tell you sort of the concept, but everything else you still won't have, right? So number of players, right? That's really a nice name. And if that was there, that's certainly a great start. But it does not tell you, right? It's still missing, to me, key information. It's this idea of we want one place for concepts, right? To me, that's the whole idea behind, like, cohesion. I want something where I can look in one place and say, what does this thing mean? What does player count mean? And we know what it kind of means casually, but like, okay, what are the details of it? Is, what are these? Well, these players. Okay, that's fairly clear. But what's the range? Oh, it's 1 to 5. How do I know? Because there's one place in the code that I can go to. It's not strewn throughout the place. And also, one of the things that it does is we start to see, as we raise a level of abstraction of our of things in our class, we may start to see, hey, look, I've got this players thing here, and I've got bets, and as you raise the level of abstraction, this is really about player bet. It's like, oh, I've got players and player bets. Maybe there's actually a further missing abstraction, domain concept, or maybe this is just the bets are actually belong in player. Who knows? And there's some interesting questions about that our ensemble is going to have to figure out, because when do players come into existence? Right now, they come into existence when the game starts, but really they should be longer lived because there'll be their account balance associated with them, which can span multiple different games, multiple different rounds. So there's some really interesting things about, what's the life cycle of a player versus their bets, and how does that relate to game? And then it turns out there's a missing concept of table and rounds and things like that. Exactly, Tramp says, right? I mean, that's what we want to do, is we want building blocks of meaningful things. And those meaningful things, they have to be meaningful. They have to be meaningful from a domain concept. Int, long, those are not meaningful. Those are meaningless. Someone had mentioned the other day to me object calisthenics. So there's these rules about sort of, applying good OO. One of the rules, I think in general, the rules are okay. One of the rules was classes shouldn't have more than 2 instance variables. And I'm like, okay, I get the idea. And I fully support the idea that most of the time classes have too many instance variables. Too many instance variables means the class is too large and it's likely not cohesive. Because what is cohesion? Cohesion is how many methods do you have and how many different instance variables do they work with? If you've got 10 different methods and 5 of those methods are dealing with a few instance variables and the other 5 methods are dealing with a completely separate set of instance variables, that's 2 classes. That's not cohesive and should probably be split. And so we want, at every level, until we get down to the level of player count, we want meaning. So player count was easy. We go through a mechanical process of extracting a delegate, doing some refactorings, and getting to the point where we get player count. List of integer is interesting because what is the abstraction here? And if you've got ideas, I'm open to them. The integer certainly is a bet. It's a player bet. Although I don't think we have to say player because who else is making bets in this game? It's only players make bets. So it's a bet. This list of integer, though, there's no domain concept here. What do we call all the bets on the table? That's not meaningful from the domain point of view. And in fact, the fact that we can't find a domain concept means that there's something wrong. So to me, sort of constantly looking for primitive obsession, like list of players, what does that mean? Is there something missing there? And this is very much that same feeling of, it feels like there's something missing. Yeah, so there's table or something there that's missing, but I'm not quite sure what it is. But certainly the list of bets has no meaning. Yeah, so I would think that some future abstraction would be a table that has players. Table has players and has a dealer. And most of what's currently in game would become table. But then there's sort of the game in progress. And that's where some of the code that's currently in here would go. So for example, the player iterator that's iterating through the players, this actually has to do with a game in progress. And so does this one. And actually, so do these events. The shoe technically could be used across rounds, across games, and then it gets reshuffled when it comes out. So maybe it's across multiple games. This one also across multiple games. This one is definitely game in progress. Although there's dealer behavior and then there's the dealer hand. The hand itself is for a specific game in progress. What do I use them for? What do I use the bets for? The bets are used, I assume that's what you're asking. The bets are used eventually to figure out how much we pay them. And that's the feature we're currently adding, is like at least in this ensemble, we're adding the feature of betting. So we are able to place the bets, and then the next step is to be able to then say, okay, based on the outcome, how much do you win or lose? Oh, yay, hey there. Your TV is splotchy? I'm sorry that you've discovered that. I don't know. Yeah, TVs are not meant for showing this kind of information, are they? Game has table and table has bets. The way I'm currently thinking about it is a table has players and players have bets. Lexlers, am I thinking of tackling game in progress? No, not. I'm just pointing stuff out, or I'm not doing anything with. That's up to our ensemble to figure out. What was I saying? Yeah, so my current thinking about the abstractions is there's a table and players basically attach and themselves join and leave tables. And then a game starts and then sort of the table is in game playing mode. So there's some interesting state stuff going on. But in terms of bets, I very much think that because this list of integer doesn't have a domain concept, and it actually must match. So there's actually a validation when we place the bets that the number of bets placed matches the number of players. So there's this relationship there that to me clearly bet belongs to player, because it's a player placing bet, except they're doing it in the context of a game. So there's it's a bit tricky. Who's holding on to that? It's a play. Does the bet actually belong to the player? What if the player is betting across multiple tables, right? Because in the real world, you couldn't do that, although you can do multiple spaces, right? There are multiple slots at a table. You can actually play multiple hands. But in a virtual world, you can play multiple virtual tables, but you're the same player. Although, are you the same player or are you the same user that's associated with multiple players, right? There's all sorts of... I was saying the other day, like, it's amazing how what seems like such a simple thing, hey, write some code to play blackjack, right? I remember, it was one of the first things I wrote in BASIC, copying it out of the computer games book, back in the 70s. But like when you start saying, okay, we got to handle betting, we got to have multiple players, we got to have multiple tables, and things are going on simultaneously. It is, yes, it's definitely lots and lots of complexity, even though it's like, Asteroid players have seats and there are current cards set in the bet. Yeah, so I think it's sort of like player sits at a table, and so table has seats, and so at least the first cut would be a one-to-one association between players, and so it's a world of players, users, kind of things, and then you'd say join this table, and then once the game is in progress, the table's sort of locked, and then I actually think the bet is associated with the seat, because if you look at how again it works even in virtual games, you don't hold the bet in your hand. It's not like it's in your pocket. It's literally right there in front of the cards. On the other hand, where are the player hands? Right now, they're in player. So since the bets are really associated with the hand, and this is something that we'll find out so Lexlers, cover your eyes. This is something that will come up eventually. When you split, so blackjack has some complexity about things like if you get two cards that are same rank, right, a pair of eights, you can split them into two hands, and then the bets are associated. You basically have to put more bets in, because now the bets are associated with each hand. So really, bets are associated with hands, not players, and it's a subtle distinction. But yeah, that and what I love about again, sort of, you never know how complex stuff is up front, right? This is sort of the biggest problem in software development. You never know all these details up front. And even if you do, you're like, you can't implement it all at once. And so finding these details, sort of as they reveal themselves and the relationships that are revealed, to me is just fascinating. All right, Lexus, you can uncover your eyes. Yeah, right. It's like, here, implement blackjack, implement betting, right? That was the story, right? That was the feature, implement betting. It's like, ah. So, at least for now, this has no meaning. All that said, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to be doing any of that refactoring. The refactoring I want to do is, how do I refactor? If this was just an int, again, it would be easy to to refactor, because then I could just extract it as delegate and move method to move stuff to the new place. But when it's a list of integer and I'm only interested in replacing the integer part, this is much harder. So we in the ensemble, we started doing it mainly basically manually. I mean, still refactoring, but not using automated refactorings. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time of trying to figure out, can I do this using some automated refactorings? Dote Attitude, wow, 18 months. Thank you so much for resubscribing for 18 months. OASL is why we invented the job title. So for architect, a project is expected to go off in a room and draw boxes and arrows to capture the complexity of the design. Yeah, it doesn't work. I've been there, done that. Sat with people trying to break down the work, trying to estimate the pieces of the work. It just doesn't work. You can, the planning is important, but the plan itself not terribly helpful, right? The design is important. The designing is important, but the design itself is not terribly useful. Yeah, exactly what Kasira. It's like the details and level of complexity is this fractal nature of it that I don't know, I think is one of the things I like about this stuff. No, you didn't miss the refactor. I've been just babbling. All right, so we've got so we've got this place bets method. So what we want to end up with, right? We'd like to end up with some method like this that is place bets that takes a list of bet. That's what we want. And so how can we get there using automated refactorings? I have no idea. I don't know. So one thing that we that came up as an idea. Remember what happened to the world orc thing? I'm going to come back to that one. I might have to do that on another stream. Because this was the one I wanted to play around with. So one of the ideas that came up with that came up during the ensemble is treat this as that the bets are something, and then see if we can go from there. And I had trouble sort of conceptualizing that second or third step. So we're gonna do that. Estrid, and don't stick to the plan when circumstanced. Yes, exactly. Do not stick to the plan just because it was the plan. So what we can do is we can basically, oops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted that. We can introduce a parameter object. Or we could extract a delegate. They're essentially the same outcome. What would extract delegate look like? So that would pull out the whole thing and delegate the place bets and current bets to something else. So if we did that, then we could call it a bet handler, right? I want to try this one though, but not yet. So let's do the introduce parameter object. So I'm puzzled by this keep method. So this is why experimenting with the automated refactoring is so important, is because it's the documentation on these things are not great, because it's really hard to document these refactorings, because you'd have to write like pages and pages of, well, if you do this and this is the situation, then this is what it looks like. But if you do this and you check this checkbox, then this is what it looks like. And so you have to kind of experiment. Yeah, exactly, Whiskey. Estimating is useful because you can find out what you're assuming or what you don't understand, especially if different people estimate differently. But the estimates themselves are not terribly interesting. Oh yeah, that's the question. I tend to try to not do very much planning at all. But that depends on sort of how, quote, agile you are. All right, so our new class, we're going to call it bets, plural, because it's a list of them. And we'll create a new class. Could create an inner class. I don't know that that helps. So let's create a new class and just refactor and see what happens. No, Lexlers, this is reset back to the point where we didn't yet introduce the bet class, and this is bets plural, yeah. And I'm shaking my fist at IntelliJ that decided adding the number 1 was important here, because it is not. So now we've got, so let me open this class up, and I'm going to flip this over to the left side. So how does this help us? Does this help us at all? This, oh, interesting. It created a record. Do I want a record? No, I think the record, I think a class is going to be easier. Let's take that out. So how does this help us? Yes, I could use $sign. That wouldn't be confusing at all. Encapsulate fields, but that's the whole field. Yeah, so this was where I was stumped. It's like, okay, so we extracted out bets, but how do we get from here to a list of bet, right? Does this help us? So I don't think there's any way. Yeah, I don't think there's any automated refactoring that's going to get us to change the generic type of this list and allow us to introduce bets. So what's sort of so what's going through my head is like, what if I had like some variables like this, right? Right, and sort of manually do that. Then I could migrate each individual one, and that might help. Yeah, the type migration, every time I try it, it's like, oh, that doesn't do what I thought it would do. So type migration, whoops. We could introduce bet and see if the migrate works. I remember the reason why I sort of discarded it, but I haven't tried it in a while, so we could try that. So let's create an inner class, or let's just create a class here, and we'll call it let's bet, and it's got an int in it. Bet. Make it private. You want to get our setter for it. For now, sure. And let's see if that does anything for us. Oh, amount? Sure, amount. Oh, you didn't rename the things, darn it. Really? Why didn't you rename it? Because I didn't tell it to. Rename accessories. Yes. Okay. So let's see if can we do a type migration to list of bet? Yeah, so it's a migration. I honestly think this is not useful because it can't convert the expression everywhere else. Yeah. Sorry, just go and see if I miss anything, chat. So what would happen if I introduced list bet as a second parameter? Oh, that's interesting, Astrid, about introducing bet as a subclass. That's interesting. So that would be an interesting thing to subclass it and then replace it. I don't know. This isn't going to work. So let's not do that. You propagated list bet from the place bets method. Oh, introduce parameter. Yeah, so that was the next one, right? Yeah, so by just introducing the parameter object, that didn't really get us anywhere because it only changed this method. What we really want is we want to change anywhere it's used to that. So let's go back. Let's roll back. We'll delete that. Yeah. Hey, you didn't roll back. There we go. Okay. So if we so it still requires us to create the bet class. So I don't think there's any way for us to go manually there. Well, actually, we could do that here. We could introduce parameter object for this. And so this is bet. Yeah, that's fine. And of course it replaced it with some other thing. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't think making bet a subclass of integer makes this process any easier or harder. So let's see. So once we have that, we could say list of bet. I don't know if I want to do this though. So we want new, we want bet new lists. So this will help us fix the public method. We'll have to probably fix the private method separately. All right, so if we introduce this as a parameter, all the places that this currently exists will be replaced by creating this list. But then we need to change these to use it. So can we do a migration here? I don't think so, because there's no direct way to do that. And here is if bet were a subtype, that might help, right? So this won't work. Yeah, whatever. Because there's no way to convert an integer to a bet. But if bet were bet extended, so if we did public class bet, can we extend it? Sure. I've never even tried. Can we actually extend it, or is it final? The create customer super. Sure. Yeah, I don't care. Oh, it's marked deprecated, marked for removal. Yeah, integer is the final class. That's what I suspected, is that the boxed classes, integer and so on, are final. Yeah, it's too bad. Can we do number? I don't think we can do number, because number is abstract. So we could implement the methods. I don't. So I think this is the wrong way around. I think so, and this is where, again, like the documentation for let's go back to a record. Let's convert this to a class, because I don't want it as a record. See, I would have thought that because this has a constructor that would have figured out how to, but it's not a direct conversion. And so like type migration here. It's like the documentation for this is not very helpful. This is basically the documentation. Let me go here. So this is the documentation for type migration. Lets you automatically change a member type from integer to strings, for example. And this is kind of what I wanted to do, but why is it not? Why is it not doing what I wanted to do? Because it seems like this is what it should do, right? Because that's kind of what it says, right? Especially the container one, right? Right, from I to string to I to integer is kind of what we're doing, maybe. I wonder if migrate type of parameter bets. Yeah, I still don't understand why it's just not letting me do this, because it seems like that's what it should do. I wonder if it's because it thinks it's an... So here it's an int. Yeah, I could ignore and continue and see what it does. Let me do a commit. Created class. So interesting. So here, okay, that's fine because we were converting from one to the other. Thanks in Kugel. It did change the types of our methods as well as the type here. So maybe, and this is fine, we can actually delete this because this was temporary anyway. So this is weird. Can we fix that? I mean, this will go away anyway because the is invalid bet amount will be functionality that will be on bet itself. Astrid, you read my mind. I was thinking, what if there was a copy constructor? With that, so that is one. So there's one error here. Where also there compile errors. The betting form. That's fine because that's a conversion that the betting form needs to do. Is that it? Is just those two places? I don't believe that. But let's try fixing this one. Should we just go and fix it? Yeah, we should just fix it because it doesn't need to new bet at all. It's already a bet. So let's do that. Let's just say bet. So that's a manual change. I lose a point for that. We got the blackjack controller here. Bets. this needs to be in the form of, yeah, so we need some kind of conversion method here, which I already had and I deleted. And here we had it. Yeah, basically this. So we can just actually slam that in here, which is that. Bet. Are we not allowed to access it? I'm confused. Why can it not resolve bet? Did it put bet in the wrong place? No, it's in the right place. Why can't it see bet here? I'm confused. All right, let's I'm not seeing why this is such a problem. This is a list of bet. Oh, name bets. This should be a list of bet. Why? Wow, that was weird. Okay. You all saw that, right? It's like it was complaining before and now it works. Okay, whatever. So let's see if there are other compilers. So you'll have to remind me of the move you're talking about, Luxlers. I want to try different things, and that's why this is experimenting, is I want to do different things. So yeah, so now we've got a bunch of places where place bets was taking a list of a number, and that just won't work because we need basically a list of bets. So we'd have to replace those with bet of. So this is, we could make that change, and we'd have to make that change anyway. But I feel like this is, and so this is, you know, the situation that I talk about in my classes where I say, take small steps, that are safe. Because once you get into compile error land, right, once there's a single compile error, you really don't know how many compile errors there truly are, right? It looked like there were only 2, but then we fixed those, and now there's what? A whole bunch more. Right now there's these and some, these are warnings. This one, these are warnings. That's interesting. I don't care about the warnings. But now they're like 6 different, and this may be it. From what IntelliJ reported, there, I think there's still a few others. But I think that's why the method that I use a lot, which is introduce parameter to push out the type that I want people to pass in, I think would work better than the type migration. So let's reset back. Not that one. And let's make sure our tests compile. So we're good there. I still don't know what was up with IntelliJ, where it was just not recognizing bet. It had imported it, and I think it's like it almost didn't realize that it had imported it or something. All right, so going back to here, back to, I'll close some of these. Here we are. Okay. Yeah, we can jump to the timeline. What did you want to look at? Yeah, let me, did I make any changes? Why does it think I made changes? Oh, I did. That's fine. Let's roll back. And we'll switch to... Yep. So what do you want me to look at, Lexos? Yes, from here, right, and that's what I was going to redo is this manually. So yes, that works great once we're here, but how we get here better is what I'm trying to figure out. Hey, Kademla, do I use hot swapping? No. Yeah, so from here, yes, right, because but we had to do the manual work of updating this method to take a list of bets, and that's what I'm trying to figure out is how can we get here without doing a manual operation? All right, so in this point, right, we've got place bets that takes a list of integer. That's fine. If we could figure out how to push this out as a parameter, yes, that fixes all colors. Yeah, I guess I don't use hot swapping because I just don't. I never find myself these days having to debug in production, as it were. So from this point is what I'm trying to figure out a better refactoring for than, or at a more automated refactoring than what we did manually in our ensemble, which is how do I get this to be a list of bet? And basically this as well. And so that's where the type migration, it would be interesting if I could just use the type migration for just these two methods. So let me flip these around. Yeah. And I'm going to flip this up. So what I really want is, and this is where I'm thinking from introduce parameter, I kind of feel like I want to push the conversion and the usage internally. Yeah, I could introduce a parameter here, that I know, but that doesn't help me. No, I swapped some methods, so it was, your original number was correct when you said it. So I can introduce this as a parameter, but that means it doesn't change the types of these two, and that's what I'm trying to address right now. Is now, one thing I could do is basically re-inline these two methods. This one doesn't care about the type, so this one is relatively straightforward because it's really about how many bets are there and does it match the player count. This one converts it to the bet this way. And I don't see any automated way to do it. Let me just do a commit. So let's inline this and inline this. Yeah, I was thinking now if we introduce a parameter, what happens? I don't think it's going to be smart enough to figure out what to do with this here, but let's try it. So let's introduce this as a parameter. So that pushed it out everywhere, but I still have to basically stop using the old one. That's the step that I need to do. Now, I don't know if there's a. Yeah, so you can only get rid of this one during that introduce parameter if you stop using it. So let's push it back. So I have to stop using. I have to basically replace. So I can do that. It's no longer an automated refactoring. But so far, what have we done? We've inlined. That's on a refactoring. Somebody needs to keep score. So we did an inline on the two. That's automated. Those are basically 0 points. We created the bet class manually, so I don't see any way of avoiding that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's all contained in this method. We don't have to change the signature to the two private methods. So I think that's where we are. Yeah, data attitude is right. It's like now I'm basically doing a manual change inside of a method. And so the reason why I focus so much on automated refactorings is I'm always trying to think about when folks have code bases where they feel like the code they're changing isn't covered well with tests. My preference is go cover it better with tests, but sometimes you can't do that. And so are there automated refactorings, which are generally, though not always, more reliable? But I think here we basically just need to replace bets but actually not that one. So we need to replace these two with domain bets. And then this is a manual change because now it's just bet. And then we can just make it a lambda. So that should still pass all the tests. Still means here we have to make this change manually. But then we might be able to do a type migration, because the type migration didn't work well because we had a lot of places that were passing in a list of integer. But if we introduce parameter to push this code out, that might be okay. So what was our score? So basically create bet was manual. Inline, replace bets with domain bets. So the problem is we're still storing bets. We could, and so here I'm trying not to change the instance variable type. So we could say domain, we could do this in the form of domain bets. So domain bets, and then basically map it. So bet amount or get bet. What was it? What was in our bet class? Oh, just bet. Oh, didn't I want to call that amount? That was way back when. Okay, let's rename this. Let's rename this. And let's rename this. And this has to be, actually this we can then just say, we don't need a copy of, we can just do a toList, because that will create our copy. So now, so that was a manual change, but it's an equivalent change. Now we can act, now this is the only usage of bets. So now we should be able to introduce parameter, and yes, it will remove bets because it's no longer used. We'll do that. And then we can basically inline this. And then rename this to drop the word param. So now we've changed external usages of this. Current bets is still returning a list of integer, but I think we can do a type migration on that. All our tests should still pass. And now the call sites against this are a bit ugly. List of one stream map bet new to list. But we should be able to we'd have to clean those up manually. We could use the structural search and replace to replace those. But the point is we haven't broken anything. We haven't, stuff compiles and works. May not be great, but it compiles and works. So now the question is so let me put a placeholder here. And so now can I do the type migration? Let's see. There it is. So can we do bet here? It's odd that it says it can't convert an empty list, because empty list works with any list type. Here it can't convert this, which is too bad because actually it would just drop the stream part. The 6 here, that's going to be a problem. The assert that's going to be a problem. So this might, but I think this is fewer than we had before. So let's ignore and see what happens. So we've got one compile error here, but that's an easy fix because we just say, in actuality, we basically just do this copy of our domain bets. So that fixes that. And now we've got a compile error here. But that's fine. We can basically do a bet, a new bet of 6. And here, hey, Q-coding. I presume you were streaming earlier. I'm sorry, I forgot. I don't know what your schedule is. I was just randomly streaming. Welcome. Thanks for bringing your party over. I should add to my calendar like when you're streaming, because I know you're more regular than I am. I try not to stream the same time as people like you, so sorry about that. I'll make sure to watch out for that next time. So here, I think we can do an extracting, and it's basically bet, no, bet. Why are you not importing bet? I don't know why it's having so much trouble importing bet. But let's go ahead and then convert this to a lambda. So actually, that wasn't so bad. Yes, it does assume bet is immutable and bet is immutable, so that's fine. Yeah. That actually wasn't so bad. So the first doing the introduce parameter to get this to be list of bet. So inlining these to get rid of the private methods that would have been awkward to change. Then we can now refactor these. And then doing the type migration converted this for us automatically, leaving us to do a manual change down here, but it was a trivial manual change. And then fixed up a couple of places in the code, in the test code, but not that many. So I think that's probably the best. I can't think of any other approach that that would get us where we got with as few manual changes as we did. So this is where the game of refactoring golf comes in, right? It's like, okay, we did a manual change to let's look at our commits. So we created the bet class, that was manual. And then we changed, yeah, that was, and then we, no, wait, no, we actually didn't do that manually, right? We actually extracted, we do that as an extract parameter object. So on the is invalid amount, we extract parameter object and we get a bet object. And so that creates our bet class, right? Because it did it. Yeah, because it created the record and then we converted it to the class. So that was automated. Then we did the introduce parameter. Why does that look weird? Oh, because that's game service. This is what we're interested in. Yeah, so then we basically took domain bets, define. So here is where we had to do the manual work to define the conversion. What have we got? We've got list of integer. What do we actually want the parameter to be? We want it to be a list of bet. And so creating this and then changing the code that uses it to use domain bets, then introduce parameter. So manual work to change this, but we inlined it, so it was a little easier. And then introduce parameter. That got us to the point where we then had only remaining thing was we were internally storing it as a list of integer. Type migration got us over that last hump with then some minor manual cleanup. So that's not too bad. Yeah, and so now we can so when I do these kinds of refactorings, there's this sort of large granular, large scale changes, and code is getting messy as you're doing it. And so for me, there's always the tidy up phase. Like, okay, what were the things that I knew I was going to have to clean up? So I know I'm going to have to clean up things in my test where they were converting needlessly things back and forth, as well as the these preconditions. We can now re-extract them and they'll do the right thing. So this one was, well, this one we want to leave because actually we're not done yet. So we've done, we've solved primitive obsession, and always what happens once you solve primitive obsession is you now have feature envy. So now we have feature envy, right? Here we're basically streaming through, we're calling this method invalid bet amount, but this actually belongs on bet. Introduce field on the new list of bets. You're talking back at this point, Astrid? Introduce a field on that. I think at the point where, and I didn't capture this as a commit, I'll probably do this again and do even more frequent commits. At the point where this was this, we could have introduced a field on this. I'm not sure that would have helped, because the type migration did the swapping of the type of the field of bets for us. So I'm not sure what that would have helped with. But let me do a commit here. Is that true? Are we to have no more list of integer? Yep, that's true. I'm still like, why IntelliJ thought that it couldn't do an assignment of this to for the conversion of the type migrations. Like, that just works. Yeah. So primitive obsession, creating the bet class, revealed now feature envy for the is invalid amount. We know it's primitive. We know it's feature envy because it's making a decision based on information pulled from another object. Not supposed to do that. So we can take this, we can do an F6 move it to bet. And now, now it's basically just, this is slightly nicer. So now we can take this, extract this to require all bets valid. Okay, why did it do that? All right, valid bets. Let's be more specific that we want bet amounts. This one goes back to being require player count. And there we go. So now these, which were list of integer before, now of course they're list of bet because we extracted them after we'd already changed that. And our test should still pass. And so now if we look at bet, we might also want to make it easier to create bets. And so converting this to a factory method, that's another cleanup we can do. Luckily, IntelliJ will do that for us. And so now we're doing this require valid bet amounts here. But why should we even do that, right? The whole idea of fixing primitive obsession for this integer was to make it so that if you have a bet, by definition, it's valid. So, so this invalid bet amount, no, you shouldn't have to call it manually, right? So here's where we want to say, again, this is now a manual change. We want to make sure that you can't even create a bet unless it's valid. So this currently requires it to call amount, which is kind of silly. So one of the things that happens is when you do a move method to cohere the method, to put it where it belongs, to fix feature envy, a lot of times you'll end up with weird stuff like this, where we don't need to call a method. We can just do this. Except we want is invalid amount to be to not be a method on really on the instance anymore. We want to move that earlier. So we're gonna have to create it, make it static. So we can go ahead and make it static. We're going to add the parameter for the field. Yes, I could have done the inline. Turns out inline is actually more keystrokes than just deleting the parentheses, but yes. And let's see. So field amount is not accessible. Really? What would happen if I do that? Yes. So I shouldn't have actually done that. So let me try that again. So now if I make it static, like that, and now You naughty raccoon. You missed the part where you can't extend integer because integer is a final class. So not a crazy idea, but it doesn't work. Yep. So now I want to, but I don't actually want bet as the parameter. So let's not do that. I think I gotta. See, here's where doing it the inline way, I have to do this and I have to say inline only and keep the method, and then I have to do the same thing here. Turns out just deleting the parentheses is easier. So I can make this public temporarily. Then I can make this static. And then I can call it from here. So if invalid bet amount, we'll throw an invalid bet amount. Extending object? Everything extends object. This should be equivalent. So here I am relying on my tests. Oh, what? Huh. Okay. IntelliJ should have changed this when I did the make factory method. That to me is a bug, but easy enough to change. It's just of. Do you not do it everywhere? What was the point of doing the refactoring if you're not going to fix this stuff, IntelliJ? Fine, I'll fix it myself. All right. So now, now we don't need this require valid bet amounts anymore because you can't create, right? And how do we know? Well, we can go and comment out this method. So this is where we're treating our TDD as an experiment platform. So our hypothesis is we don't need this method anymore. And our experiment is run our tests and see the result. Everything still passes. How do we know that it's actually checking for the exception? Well, we can actually stop throwing this exception and see if anything fails. Stuff fails, so stuff was expecting that exception to be thrown, and so that's now still working. Yeah, so I'm not sure what happened when I converted to a factory method. I'll have to go look. There may be something I missed. But yeah, so why do they make integer final? Performance reasons and other reasons that are probably much more useful than what we would have needed. The invalid bet amount in terms of the exception, I'm going to get to that in a second. And yes, amount is now public, but now I'm going to go clean up. So now that this is no longer needed, we can go ahead then and get rid of the method. We can go ahead and make this private again, run our tests, everything should still work. I'm going to inline this. And then re-extract it to be require valid amount. And that should still work. I don't feel like I need a toString on this. Or actually, I'm going to regenerate this stuff. Oops. Ooh, I don't check for null. Actually, this shouldn't be an integer. This is an artifact of what was a list of integer, but this can just be an int. So can I do a type migration on this? Can I convert it to an int? Well, that wasn't terribly useful. So I'm just going to change these manually. Oh. Ah, because we don't have equals. Great. Perfect. So now, and this should be integer int 2. Now I can generate a proper equals and hash code. Okay. And I'll generate a toString just for the heck of it. All right. Now all our tests should pass because we got a proper equals. Awesome. Okay. I don't think there's anything else to clean up on bet. I think that's fine. Now we can go back to look at place bets. So now place bets doesn't need to check that each individual bet is valid because now that's done by bet itself. And so now we're just requiring that it matches the number of players. And then basically a more global check that cards have not been dealt, because you can't bet after cards have been dealt. That's not what the game of blackjack is about. So cleaned up, paid up bet to use int instead of integer. And now on creation. Yeah, I mean, maybe the require valid amount should be in the constructor. That's a good point. Here it doesn't matter because it's private, but sure, it is certainly possible that somebody could unintentionally make that public. And one of the things we want to do is try to prevent future silly mistakes, like basically prevent accidents. So sure, I like that. Let's do that. And I'll drop that down. Oops. So maybe in the future, to prevent that kind of problem from cropping up, I don't convert to factory method until I've already gotten all the validation done in the constructor. Asks about cards dealt belongs on player. Cards dealt is a table game oriented thing. We don't care that cards are specifically dealt to anyone. We care that the initial deal has happened. And that's what it means. The fact that we're checking it on a current player is, and we talked about this in our ensemble, where basically it looks like we're missing a concept of what stage are we in, what state is the game in. And I think I even have, thought I had, thought I had a file. Thought I had a diagram. Where did I create that diagram? That's not it. Thought I'd created a state diagram. No, I remember what happened. I was trying to use ChatGPT to have it create a mermaid diagram for the states of a game, and I gave it the states, and it just couldn't do it. I said, no, I want the player turn to be a substate and the dealer turn to be a substate, but the overall thing to be this. And it just could not no matter, I tried for like 20 minutes and it could not generate the right syntax. I have a feeling partially it's because there's just not enough examples in its database for how to do substates using Mermaid. And it's possibly also because its database is a couple years out of date. But yeah, no matter what I said, no, you've created the state diagram. I wonder, do I even have it? Hold on a second. Let me see if I have that chat still open. Yeah. So, you can see how long I was trying. Like, so it's like, here, create a state diagram. It's like, okay, I want a higher level diagram that includes the betting phase because it forgot the betting phase. Okay, it's like, and it generated this thing with subgraph. It's like subgraph is totally wrong. It's like, okay, try again. Okay, well now you did it, but it's state. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And now I needed to show where the decisions are, and then it just like it could not create the right thing. It's like, this isn't even right syntax. Let me try again. Well, now you're not using the substate. Let me try again. It's like, okay, now you you lost the states for the player and the dealer turn. And then it's like, okay, no, I don't want it was just like this back and forth. Like, it's like, and now you just ended up with stuff that still does not work over and over and over and over again. And I was just cracking up because I'm like, you just don't know what you're doing because you're just copying predictive text. So sometimes ChatGPT can help with, but in this case, I really, honestly, I expected better from it, and maybe I shouldn't have expected better. So anyway, all that's to say is that they're getting back to what triggered this was we don't in the game currently have a concept of what state is the game in, right? Because it is a state machine. It pretty much is something like this, right? Place bets, deal, player turn, and then dealer turn, and then determine outcomes. Yeah, I know my expectation was too high. I figured something, I mean, this is right up its alley though, right? It's not like I expected it to it's like, this is supposedly like what these kinds of tools are for, and it just couldn't do it. I don't know why it got confused about the syntax. It shouldn't have gotten confused, but whatever. Yeah. And hi, Kuros, welcome. So it's like, this is sort of technically correct, but it's not at all what I wanted. And I ended up, I think I was trying to do it, and it's like, oh, the problem is Mermaid actually doesn't draw it the way I want to draw it, and that's not a syntax problem. It's just I don't like the way Mermaid does it. Yes, so that is a good point about cards is empty. This is feature envy. We really shouldn't be making a decision based on sort of internal information. So I agree that there actually should be a has cards. We could ask hand value, but really has cards is the right question. So I agree that would be a slight improvement. But the real issue is what we really want to know is, did the initial deal happen? And that would be a state transition that would happen in initial deal. And we just don't have, we don't generate that kind of information. We don't store that kind of information. What's interesting about this, and this goes back to some other interesting conversations we had around the game class, there's all these methods on it. Not all of them are valid. So let's look at its public API. So we've got current stuff. Those are all queries. Dealer hand is a query. Events is a query. Initial deal is a command. But once you do initial deal, you should not be able to do initial deal again. In fact, we don't enforce that. That's not great. Place bets. Well, that's what we were just talking about. You shouldn't be able to place bets if initial deal happened. And so this is where the state pattern, as ugly as the implementation is, can be really useful, because you can say, look, we are in betting game, right? You can't do anything but place bets. There's no other operations that are valid at that point, right? You can't even ask the question of, like, what are the player cards? You can't even ask the question of what is the dealer hand, because it makes no sense to do that at the betting phase. Then once you're out of the betting phase, you're now in the initial, the game. I won't use the word game started because that causes all sorts of confusion, but you're in the phase of now game in progress. The cards have been dealt, which means you can no longer call initial deal, and you can no longer call place bets. Makes no sense to do either one of those. Those are completely invalid commands. And even some of the queries, like what's the player outcome, that's invalid unless the player is done. And so one of the things that I think I see, and I don't do enough of it myself, is really think about what is the proper allowable things we can do to an object. What is the protocol? What are the preconditions? What are the allowable operations? And they're actually much smaller, right? We've got all these methods, and this is kind of large, but only some of these are valid at any point in the game. Escaho, thank you for another sub with Pride Gaming. Right, Lexlers, and that's the problem with the state pattern, at least as one way to implement it. You can basically have an abstract implementation that throws for all the methods. Then the implementations only have to implement what they actually support. You could, because that's you need them to all be polymorphic. You need them to all basically be games. If you want to go a little more complex, then you'd have to go a different route. You'd have to have now different types for each phase, and that gets a little trickier. However, there are some ways to deal with that that I'm gonna be exploring at some point fairly soon. Hey Spyrox, thank you for the caffeinate. Yeah, so the throwing of the unsupported operation exception as a way of implementing the state pattern really bugs the heck out of me. It just feels so wrong because you're basically throwing a runtime exception. You're not preventing it at compile time. But there's in my head, this very much relates to REST. Specifically the hypermedia part, where you present options based on what the current state is. So imagine the UI would be saying, okay, you can do a hit and a stand because the game said these are the allowable, it's again very much that I'm showing my age, the books where you had play your own adventure, right? So it says, hey, if you choose this, go to page 45. If you choose this, go to page 132. Right? Those decisions then lead you to other decisions, but they're fixed decisions, right? If the game starts, the only thing you can do is place bets. It knows that from the domain. Yes, some of you are also showing your age, right? If you remember those. And that's what we want, is the domain knows exactly what's allowable and what's not allowable. And so therefore, presenting that to the UI or as an option through the APIs, here's the links you can go to. Where to get that? The controller didn't care. It's just translating whatever's in the domain. Then it's just the technical aspects of how do we do that. So, hey, Suichi. And so that's connecting those. And so now you end up where if you can do that, then you don't have to use this ugly version of the state pattern. You basically just have different objects. How do you get those objects into memory? Those are retrieved from a repository. How do you know which object to retrieve? Well, you're calling a certain method on the use case layer, right? So the command that you're sending to the use case layer, to the service layer, that's something that is really interesting because it prevents all these invariant problems. Now I haven't implemented that all the way through, so it's just this fuzzy idea in my head. And there are other there are other frameworks that I've seen do this kind of thing, although they've always felt really heavyweight. Axon is one of those. So anyway, so that's something that I'm going to be exploring on future streams. Suiji came in for your final closing thoughts. No, we basically just finished the refactoring. And we were talking about the problem with cards dealt. Yeah, I mean, if you exactly, Suiji, that is definitely what you want. Is the UI doesn't have to do anything anymore, assuming you're using. Actually, I think an SPA, a single page application, or server side generated would be the same thing. The choice is really up to the domain, and trying to copy that logic into the UI is such a waste, and so prone to error when it's really just like the domain knows what's available. Let it expose it. Yeah, through however it does it, it can expose here the next possible things. That's where it can get tricky. Is how do you expose it? What does that look like? But then there is no logic on the front end. It's always saying, what's available, what do I do? In fact, right now, even we have a bit of that, although it's going to get much more complicated, and then it's going to have to get easier because we're not going to like it how complicated it is. Right now, what we do in the controller is we redirect, right? Which page do we go to? Right? The logic is basically asking the game, where are we in the game? There are only two current states in the game. It's either not over or it's over. And so if it's over, we redirect to done. If it's not over, we redirect to game, the in progress page. Once we add betting in, and once we add especially more complicated versions of betting with splitting and insurance, this mapping because that's what this is. It's mapping state to just what page do we go to. Will just need to be expanded, and that's where we'll need to have some states exposed by the game service so that we know how to map them. So that's what I want to implement, because Captain Sparrow and some other folks on the Discord, we've been talking about this in the Discord. By the way, if you're not in the Discord, you're missing out on some great discussions like this. And so I was talking about, just the simple idea of when you're playing like a game like chess, there's at least two states from a technical standpoint. There's, the player is putting the pieces in the right place. And then maybe the computer does that for you. But if you're really just saying, I'm implementing where I can allow you to set up the board, or maybe it's some other kind of game where there's the setup phase. Once it's set up, you don't have those operations anymore. And I see this pattern time and time again of objects go through different states where certain things are allowable and certain things aren't. And they transition, and they really should become different objects because the things you can do to them and ask them are different. And this is where the data in the database may be the same, but how you look at it through the lens of what object does it become in memory, it's not a one-to-one relationship. And this is key. So there's been on and off debate about, do you map objects, domain objects, to some other kind of object in order to store it in a database? And on the one side, it's, well, I like clean separation. But if it's always one-to-one, I could totally be convinced that's overkill. That's really not necessary. But what if the same data is interpreted and loaded into memory as different objects depending on what you're doing? Now you have to have that separation. Yeah, exactly, Astrid. There's a whole set of these sub games. The place your bet game, place bet game. There's the ready to deal game. There's the cards dealt game, which becomes then, as soon as the cards are dealt, well, then now you're in progress game. Then there's the dealer turn game, right? All the players have gone, but now it's the dealer's turn. And then there's the game over game. And they're all game. And right now, that's all currently represented in one large object that's persisted in a certain way. This timeline does not persist games. There's another timeline that does. I have like 6 different ensemble series where we work on the same project, and they're all off in different directions. So we call it the multiverse, the blackjack multiverse. But the data is the same, right? What cards the players have, what cards the dealers have, if they have any, what bets have they placed. The data is the same. And if you just look at it as like, well, it's just a game object and we store it as a game object in the database, yeah, that's one-to-one, and why bother with the overhead of mapping? But if they're different objects, and so there's sort of views, in some cases, maybe even literal views of the data that are now different objects in memory, now that separation is good. So Koras asked about who's the persistence consistency authority. One of the nice things about these separate states is a lot of them are read-only views. So you get rid of some of the persistence consistency. The other one is if you tried to, for example, let's talk about a game, you couldn't retrieve it. So I'm assuming that the database is owned by the application, right? If somebody else is also modifying the database, you've got other issues around consistency. So I haven't thought about that. And you'd have to do some of the stuff that James Shore and I have been doing about database consistency, about making sure that it's valid. But if I tried to read in a game, right, and we had these multiple different states, right? So we had, the place bet game, right, and then the in progress player turn player's turn game, dealer's turn game, and then completed game. All right, so let's say those are the 4 phases. There's going to be some enum or some information that tells us what type it is. So if we are currently in the dealer's turn game, and you tried to read it in as a place bet game, that would be an exception. You couldn't read it in we're in the end game now. You couldn't read it in and try to operate, right? You couldn't, because if we were in place bet game, the only thing you can do is place bets. When you're in player's turn game, there's no such method. So if you tried to read it in and now dealer's turn, and again, whether these are the phases or not is a separate issue. If you tried to read it in, and it's currently in dealer's turn, but you tried to read it in because somehow there was a UI bug and you tried to do place bets, it would blow up upon reading and say, sorry, I can't do that. There's some data corruption, or there's an error somewhere. So I don't think the persistence consistency is as big of a problem. You know the type because somebody asked for it to happen, right? So because assuming the UI works properly, once you've submitted the bets, now the game in the database is in player's turn. And so what is the UI presenting? It's, hey, player 1, do you want to hit or stand? And so you click on the hit button, it does the hit command. That use case, that service method, goes to the repository to retrieve the player's turn game because it knows exactly what type it should be in. That's hard coded in the service layer. I don't think that's a big deal. I don't know. There might be another way to map it, but it's always the application layer knows what object to retrieve. And since it is in charge of retrieving that object, I think that will just work. And absolutely, you could, if you wanted to, have a separate repository for each subgame. Absolutely. And then your command, then the method becomes then a command that has the only repository it knows it needs to know how to retrieve from. And these things then become more isolated. So to me, this is, I don't know. And, a lot of this stuff has been done before in different ways. I haven't seen anybody do explicitly this way, and it just could be that I'm not aware of it. There might be it's a lot more activity in the C# community, C#.NET community for some of this stuff than there is in Java. Who knows about the transition from one game to the other? The game does. The game knows about, if you do this, here's the new transition. Right, so when we do operations, right, when we do commands, we do actions, right? They're all the same thing, right? So for example, initial deal is a command, and then when you ask the game, what's your current state, it will tell you what its current state is. And each implementation, it would be hard coded. So I'm on the side, I think, of there would probably be an interface that would have something that all games need, which is, what is the current state? That's off the top of my head. I don't know if that'll work, but that's sort of what I'm thinking, is that then you can ask generically, what state are you in? And then that's how you'd know. So the command would still not return anything, because I really do like true commands being not returning any values. And then there's just a query that all games know, and they would return a hard-coded piece of information. So each game knows its own state because it's literally identified by its state, and they'd all be the game interface, so you could ask any of them, what state are we in? Because I think that's something that is indeed common across all of them. And so show me the current game. Well, that's going to differ depending on what state it's in. If it's place bets, even that question of show me the current game, all it's about is we're waiting for you to place your bets. There's no other information that's going to have, because other than, we know who the players are. So what I need for this, I'm probably gonna fork this, the Ensemble Blue timeline, because it has actually either this one or another one, because I need the bedding support, but I also need the persistence support. So I'll have to merge a couple of universes and get to the point where I've got bedding and I've got persistence using a snapshot. So I think in this universe, I've got persistence. Yes, in this universe, we have persistence with snapshots, which is now the way I do it. This one actually also has bedding. It actually does have bedding. Actually, so yeah, so I'll probably start from here. When I mix one with blue and orange. Yes, so this universe, the Wednesday universe, does not have multiple players. Do I care about that? I don't think multiple players is actually as important for what I'm thinking of. Because whether there's one or three, that's... I don't think that affects the main goal of having multiple states with games retrieved differently from persistence. Yeah, I'm not mixing blue and orange. That's okay. Hey, Blizzard. Glad to have you. Yes, I'm one of the few streamers who still does Java and likes it. No. There's always things I don't like about anything. Yeah, so I think actually this one, which is from an ensemble I did for a company, we got all the way to the point where we can place bets. There's some stuff I'd have to clean up. Yeah, I don't know what happens if you mix a color and a day of the week. Those are incompatible types. You can't combine them, so I'll throw an exception. Yeah, so that's my plan for that. You get JavaScript, right? So probably start with this Wednesday one, clean up some of the stuff that we didn't do, but mostly it has everything I need. It's got persistence, it's got bedding. Yeah. So it's got everything I need. Yes, Java is the best, except when it's not. I'm very excited about, like, Java 20 is coming out, what, in a week or three? But Java 21 is the one I'm excited about because we're going to have the preview for the long-awaited string interpolation. What are they calling it? It's JEP 430. String templates, not string interpolation, string templates. So it took forever, but they got it right. So I got that judgmental look from people every time I say I like Java. Yeah, you know, I don't know. I always have to laugh because, like, what you see with other languages is this creeping towards the stuff that Java has, like static typing. And yes, Java's got some verbosity. It's got some things missing like string templates, interpolation, but can I briefly talk about snapshots? Yeah, I can do that. Is Java the new COBOL? Blizzard, am I mentoring here? I'm answering questions. I do private coaching, if that's what you're asking about, but I don't do a lot of it because I don't have as much time these days. Anyway, I'm looking forward to string templates. Sequence collections also looks interesting, but it's a minor thing. But the stuff that's going into JDK 21. So what is the release date? March 21st. So that's when 20 comes out. 21, they're starting to target stuff for that. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, I know. I'm always like, I happen to remember 430 because one of the Bruno on, I think it was Bruno on Twitter, tweeted about it, but he got the JEP number wrong because he was talking about long ones. None of them are as long as the Loom virtual threads one, which will have yet another either preview or whatever for that. I don't know when that's going to be final. I don't think it's going to be final for 21. So what is that? That's Loom. Yeah, anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked by that. I'm really excited about Loom, but I'm fine for them to take their time and make sure it works right, because once it's out and if it's right, and I think they've got the right thing, I will be very happy. Yeah, rattling on. It's like, and 430 and 431 and 8382. Yeah, no. Walk the work, walk the board, not the people, and use names for things. So, but I won't go down the road of Jira numbers and stand-ups and stuff like that. Yes, Loom is fibers, lightweight threads. There should be a JEP for it though. Virtual threads, 436. So it's a second preview. My guess is 21 will have a third preview, although maybe they'll get it right early enough and it'll go into 21, since 21 I think is supposed to be LTS. I don't know. So 436 is the second preview of virtual threads. It's pretty long. If you're into thread stuff, boy, there's all the information you need here. So that's coming out in, so the second preview is coming out in 20. Yeah, I don't know when that's expected to go final. I don't think it's going to be 21. Yeah, so 20 has a bunch of previews, but that's the way Java works. Slow but sure, get it right when it finally gets released. Oh, I was going to talk about Snapshot, and then I'm going to end our stream. Mainly I was streaming this morning because, like, do I go out for a run? Oh, it's raining. Really stormy thunder. You might have even heard some of the thunder before, but now the rain's gone, so I want to go out and run. Well, type erasure wasn't a mistake. It's just really, really, really hard to... I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, could they have broken backward compatibility to do it better? And would that have been worth it? Maybe, but the intent of Java was always to be backwards compatible. All right, so Snapshot. Which universe am I in? Oh yeah, okay, this one. So, so I very much believe that separation of concerns, especially between domain logic and IO, is really important for testability. To me, testability is my primary goal, and I think it served me well. When we want to persist game, sort of the old way I was doing it, and it was annoying, and so I feel like I reinvented the wheel when the wheel had already been created. It's very easy to take that information and persist it, assuming you have access to all the internals, right? There's a bunch of internal state here. Whether it should all be here or there should be a sub-object, separate issue. But there's a bunch of internal state, and you need to restore that. That means there need to be some kind of query methods for each one of these, and maybe you don't want to actually reveal all that. So you may have to break encapsulation in order to persist it. If you just try to say, let me pull all the information off of game and then I'll persist it. And then when I recreate it, well, then what do I do? Do I drive the game through its normal process, dealing cards off the? No, that doesn't work. So you really do, in a sense, have to break encapsulation a bit to do persistence. Unless you want to use like Java serialization, object serialization, and that's just a bad idea. 15 years ago, maybe we thought that was okay, but now it's like, no, don't do that. So what you do is you need to create an intermediate object that's just pure data. And that's what I've been calling a snapshot. So I call this the aggregate snapshot pattern because what we're snapshotting is the entire aggregate. And then we need some way of restoring from that snapshot. So we create the snapshot, very easy. And it's an inner class because it's appropriately coupled to its parent class. And so by its nature, it's very closely related. Blizzard, I have a lot of questions every time. Feel free to ask, and I think I mentioned my Discord. Feel free to ask good questions there. When you look at the code, you can understand. Oh, great. Yes, it's nice when you can read something that's like, hey, I understood that. Yeah, so the substates of the game will be interesting. So anyway, so the snapshot's just basically, it's a DTO. It's a type of data transfer object that is very closely related and connected to the object that it's persisting. So that's why it's an inner class. And so then it just has a way to create a snapshot and a way to restore, right? Because when we load it from the repository, we have to create a game. And what do we create it from? What do we store in the repository? We don't store game objects. We store snapshots. The other thing I like about storing snapshots and having that be as the interface, as our repository interface of what we're storing, is it prevents a whole host of problems that I've encountered in the past. If I stored game directly, then that's just a reference, and then you see all of the changes along the way, right? That you really wouldn't, like, the database doesn't get automatically updated when you make changes in memory. There have been systems that do that. They are bad. Don't do that. Most systems, right, have a clear separation between what's in memory and what's in the database. And you have to explicitly say, I've now changed this in memory. Let me persist it to the database. The problem with in-memory repositories that hold on to the object directly is it looks very different. You make a change in memory and this repository sees those changes. But by forcing you to go through the snapshot, it sidesteps that problem completely and makes it much easier to get and to save and restore the object. So for a whole host of reasons, I look back at what I used to do, and I'm like, why did I ever do that? That was just dumb. It was causing all sorts of problems. So why did I do that? An example of how dumb I was, or how less I knew and now how I know more, is in Ensembler. Yeah, then the in-memory repo is still trivial to create, but you don't have to worry about that seeing changes that the repository shouldn't see. So here in Ensembler, this is still wrong. So this was my attempt to add snapshotting to the repository, but this is actually still wrong because I'm saving the member. I shouldn't be saving the member. I should be saving the snapshot. And pairing with James Shore made me realize that, yes, that's the right way to do that. Here I do convert it to a snapshot, but the conversion back and forth is just awkward. The bad example is what I did in, let's go here, JDBC Ensemble DBO. So when I convert from a domain object to the object that gets stored in the database, it's fairly straightforward. I have to do some conversions to strings, grab some meeting IDs to convert them, convert and map just to the identities. And there's a bunch of stuff I have to do that I kind of have to do anyway. But restoring it, taking a database object and restoring it and converting it back into an ensemble, that's annoying, because I have to do things like this. because I can't set, there's no method to say set state, because that would be bad. That would break encapsulation. So what I instead do is I basically look at, was it stored as completed as a string, which is horrible. Although these are in enum, so it's not as bad. But basically then I'm basically saying complete, and this actually has side effects. Complete and cancel actually have side effects. So that's the other problem, is that by going through sort of the typical routes, the typical methods, right, the typical command methods on the object as a way to restore the object, that's really bad because these cause side effects. But reconstituting it through the snapshot causes no side effects. And that's what you want. Because complete, what does it do? Well, it has some requirements. Right now, it actually doesn't do anything else, although it really should. Because there's some functionality that I'm missing, that when it's completed, well, at the object level, at the domain object level, there aren't any other side effects because events happen at the service layer. So that's not a big deal. But anyway, it's annoying to have to do that. Snapshot is a domain object, yes. It is a value object. It's just as much of a value object as anything else. But it is part of the domain. That's my current thinking. Ask me in 6 months, maybe I'll have changed my mind, but that's my current thinking. Because the snapshot can be used for multiple things, especially if you have but really what I mainly want it for is for persistence. And unfortunately, because you have to, expose the ability to get the snapshot as a public method, anybody could use it. So there's always some danger, right? There's always this trade-off, right? What is software engineering? It's all about trade-offs. There's always this trade-off of, well, if I expose this, somebody could go grab a snapshot and then investigate internally, and find some stuff instead of actually adding a proper method onto game. But I'm just trying to prevent accidents. I'm not trying to prevent purposeful silliness. Well, I always call them snapshots regardless of the domain. Yes, because in context, what it looks like when you call snapshot, what you get here, it looks like snapshot, but on the call site, it's game.snapshot. And so I kind of like that. So here it's snapshot, it's local to this, it's always called snapshot. But from the outside, you're always going to reference it as, because it's an inner class, as game snapshot, member snapshot, etc. Blizzard, you Googled me. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can see a little bit about my history. Yep. Yeah, no, we're not going to cryptographically sign our snapshots. All right. That's all for today. Thanks you all for great conversation. Well, I've got the Monday stream with James Shore. That'll happen at its usual time, which is 1 to 4 p.m. Pacific, which is add 8 hours because we haven't hit daylight savings time yet. So 9 p.m. UTC, right? Yeah, 8 hours, 9 p.m. UTC. I may stream again tomorrow, but if not, I will be streaming during the week. And what else? Yeah, join the Discord if you haven't. Have a great rest of your weekend. Stay warm and dry, because I know in some places it's cold and wet. So stay warm and dry. And I'll see you all next time. Thanks a lot.